Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's wellness webinar. I'm Samantha, and I am a registered dietitian and the wellness coordinator for Atlas. We'll be posting these wellness webinars weekly on Tuesdays throughout the quarantine period, so you can tune in to learn more about a bunch of different wellness-related topics. We'll also be posting cooking demos every Thursday, and this week in particular, I'll be making a minestrone based on tips from this webinar, so I hope that you'll also tune in for that. If you have any questions or comments or anything come up throughout this webinar, I would encourage you to ask them in the comments box on Facebook. Otherwise, you can always contact me personally, which I will share how to do at the end. So let's jump into today's topic, getting creative in the quarantine kitchen. I know that right now a lot of us are stuck at home with limited access to groceries, and so the purpose of this webinar is to help you maximize your food options and kind of learn some tips for stocking up your kitchen as well as making foods out of what you already have on hand. Quarantine or not, it's always a good idea to have your staple items on hand. So those are going to be things that are non-perishable or have a long shelf life or just things that you use a lot. So here are some ideas to kind of get you started. For grains, there's a lot of grains that you might cook with, like pasta, rice, or quinoa, or flour for baking. Things like oats and cereals and breads can make really great snacks or meals, so it's good to have those on hand. For protein, a lot of people will automatically jump to frozen meats, which do make great staple items, but there's also a ton of shelf-stable plant protein options. So looking at things like beans or lentils or nuts, or even soy products like frozen edamame or tofu, and then canned tuna are also all great protein options. For snacks, thinking of things like bars or nuts and seeds or dried fruit or any of these kinds of things that you might use to munch on. For cooking, it's important to have oils and spices on hand, as well as jarred sauces or broths or other canned ingredients that you might add to your cooking a lot. Condiments are also important, like spreads and sauces, to make sure that the food you have actually tastes good to you. And then this last one here, quick meals, I think is a really important one, especially in these times of an emergency, because it's better to have some food on hand than have nothing at all. And so things like canned soups or boxed mac and cheese, even though that might not normally be your go-to, it's really important that we at least have food available to us if we need it. With everybody frantically shopping lately, I've noticed that the store is often out of certain staple items, so we fortunately can try to make some of them ourselves. Although it does require a little bit more of a time investment up front, I figure since we're all in quarantine anyway, why not use this time to really get stocked up? Plus, my favorite part about making your own staples is that you really have better control over the nutritional value compared to what you might get in the store, because you're really controlling what you're adding in. So one good place to start is with dried legumes like beans, lentils, or peas. They're often well stocked and cheap, and they have a much larger yield than their canned alternatives. So for example, 1 pound of dry beans gives you 6 cups of cooked beans, which is a lot of beans. You can also make your own broths by saving your veggie or meat bone scraps and simmering them with spices. Doing this can be a really good way to reduce food waste, but also a really good way to reduce your sodium intake by controlling the amount of salt that you add. Another fun one to do is to purchase nuts in bulk and blend them into butters using a food processor or a really powerful blender if you have one. You can also get pretty creative with the types of nuts you're using. So playing with things like cashews or almonds or even sunflower seeds make great butters. But you can also spice things up by adding different flavors like cinnamon or vanilla extract or honey, and you can get really creative there. And finally, most homemade soups, sauces, and spreads are great for freezing and reheating later. So if you make your own in place of buying a frozen or a jarred alternative, it can be a great way for you to have these ready-to-eat meals on hand without sacrificing the taste or the nutritional value. And as another plug, I will be doing a cooking demo on this topic on Thursday, where I will show you how to make a soup that can be frozen and then thawed out later. While fresh produce can be great for the first few days after grocery shopping, it likely won't get you through the whole quarantine period, so this might be where we need to get a little creative. So some fresh fruits and vegetables do last longer than others, like apples and oranges, carrots, onions, potatoes, and sweet potatoes, so those are good ones to have on hand. But you can also stock up on frozen or canned fruits and vegetables. Contrary to popular belief, there is actually no nutritional difference between frozen and fresh or canned fruits and vegetables, because produce in any form is going to be loaded with nutrients and is worth purchasing. Plus, with canned or frozen products, you often don't have to do any of the prep work like you would on fresh produce, so they can be super easy to just eat or cook with. When you're choosing a canned product, try looking for ones without added salts, fats, or sugars or syrups. So some popular staples that you might look at would be some fruits here, applesauce, beans, and then the veggies that you might use for cooking or eating. And then as far as frozen produce goes, there's actually a lot of different pre-mixed options out there that can help you mix things up. So you could try different varieties of smoothie fruits or different stir-fry combinations. Frozen greens can be great for cooking with, and then frozen plant proteins like edamames and peas, those can be great for cooking and are super easy to use as well. Or if you really are into fresh produce or that's what's available, you can always buy it and then freeze it for later. But if you're going to do this, I would recommend that you peel and chop it first to save yourself some struggle in the future. And now we'll talk about getting the most out of your cold storage. So some refrigerated items can last for quite a while, 2 to 3 weeks depending. So things like eggs or certain dairy products like cheese and yogurt, things like tofu and deli meats, those can all make great staple items in your fridge. You can also freeze food before it hits its expiration date. So things like meats or breads and bagels, tortillas, or fresh produce are great for freezing and then reheating later. And then again, you can use perishable ingredients to make meals that you cook and then freeze and then reheat later. So things like soups and chilies, bakes and casseroles, or sauces, burritos and wraps are good for this too. And one last thing that's often overlooked is that some food items do have shelf-stable alternatives. So for example, alternative milks like soy or nut milks often come in a boxed form. You can also look at canned fish and meats. So I think people often think of tuna, but we could also look at canned chicken or canned beef. And then the same thing goes for jerky for getting meats and fish. There's also powdered forms of milk and eggs or dehydrated forms of things like soups and sauces and mashed potatoes or other grains. And so these can make really great options to just have on hand as well. So now let's try to think of some ideas of what we could actually do with all of those foods that we've stocked. A great one would be stir fries, so you can use the veggies or the meat or frozen soy products, tofu, whatever you buy, and serve it with rice or some whole grain noodles and your favorite sauce. Chilies and soups made with beans and meats and veggies and grains and dairy, that's another really great option to use all of those staple items. Oatmeal, you can do a lot of shelf-stable toppings on it, like nuts and seeds or any form of fruit really, or nut butters. You could also play with some grain bowls or similarly some bean and grain salads using your favorite protein options or salad dressings or sauces. Sandwiches and wraps and burritos you could use with fresh or frozen fillings that you've stocked up on. And again, like we've mentioned, bakes and casseroles, pastas and sauces, really great for making, freezing, and thawing out later. Another fun thing to do, dips and sides. So you can make dips and sides out of whatever you've purchased in a can. So like hummus or refried beans can be made from canned beans. And then also you can make baked goods like muffins or biscuits or breads. If you use whole grain flour or nuts, you can really bulk up some of that nutritional value of it as well. And that concludes today's webinar. If you have any questions, here's my contact info. I am also now scheduling individual telehealth appointments for dietary and wellness counseling, which are free to community transit employees, so I would encourage you to take advantage of that. Otherwise, I would love to hear from you with any comments or questions or any ways that you're staying creative and cooking during this time, so don't hesitate to reach out. Atlas is also offering other telehealth services at this time, including injury screening, physical therapy, fitness, and online yoga classes. So you can call or text the number here or send an email if you're interested in learning more or signing up for any of these. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all stay safe and well out there.